Good morning. So I was telling Brother Parks back there and Brother Tyrone it was going to be a sparsely attended crowd this morning. Brother Wayne's on vacation and my wife is filling in Sunday school class over there, and Adrian and Grady decided to help her. And Brother Croft, I saw him Saturday. He said he was a designated driver on Sunday for Tim Martin. So he said he was going to be gone. So, but anyway, I appreciate everyone who is here. If you have your Bible, turn to Genesis chapter number 42. Genesis chapter number 42. And we'll start reading in verse number 25. It says, "Then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, and to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provision for the way, and thus did he unto them. And they laded their asses with the corn, and departed thence. And as one of them opened his sack to give his ass provender, in the end he espied his money, for behold, it was in his sack's mouth. And he said unto his brethren, My money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, What is this that God hath done unto us? And they came unto Jacob their father, unto the land of Canaan, and told all that befell unto them, saying, The man who is the Lord of the land spake roughly to us, and took us for spies of the country. And we said unto him, We are true men, we are no spies. We be 12 brethren, sons of our father. One is not, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. And the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, Hereby shall I know that ye are true men. Leave one of your brethren here with me, and take food for the famine of your household, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother unto me. Then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that ye are true men. So will I deliver you your brother, and ye shall traffic in the land. And it came to pass, as they emptied their sacks, that, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said unto them, Me have ye bereaved of my children? Joseph is not, and Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, Slay my 2 sons. If I bring him not to thee, deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. And he said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in the which ye go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave." And so in this passage, obviously we've been here a while, so y'all know the backstory. But I mentioned this just at the beginning, or just at the end of the lesson last week, and you're going to see this. You're going to see this over and over in this passage right here, how that they did not understand. Obviously Joseph was to them, he was not Joseph. He was Naph-Paneah. And so they did not understand. And I like the biblical term that they use right here. It says the man who is the Lord of the land, and they call him the Lord twice. And so that's why I think it's a great spiritual application, is because they did not understand what the Lord was doing to them. They did not understand what the Lord was doing to them. And so, I mentioned it last week, how that, the things that they thought were bad were actually good. Things that they saw that were going on, they just assumed they were bad. And so we're going to see that, how that their heart, it says their heart failed them. And so here is Joseph. And again, he spoke roughly to them, and he's accused them of being spies. And I mentioned it to my wife and daughter because they weren't going to be in here this morning. I said, it had to be difficult, and it was almost some of the same things that Joseph went through. When Joseph was sold into slavery, what a terrible thing, he sold into slavery. But then he shows up into Potiphar's house, and Potiphar puts him over the whole house, and he's basically got free reign to just run the house, and he's doing a wonderful job. And so here, here's this terrible situation, but here's something good comes out of this terrible situation. And then Potiphar's wife accuses him of what she accuses him of, and so then he gets put in prison, and he's bound in prison, but yet the Bible says that God was with him. God was with him. And so there, no doubt there was this terrible mental strain that Joseph went through, was trying to figure out, what is God doing? What is God doing? Like, here I am, and I've had this dream. And this is what God showed me in the dream, but now everything, my dream is almost gone because I'm sold into slavery, and so now everything's terrible. But then, I'm sold into Potiphar's house, and Potiphar puts me in charge of everything, so it's not that bad. And then he gets put in prison, and this is terrible. And we know that they bruised his ankles with the fetters, but yet here he is. Now he's basically over the prison, and he's running the prison, and now he interprets the dream for the butler or the baker, and he's like, hey, just tells the butler to remember me, and yet he had to wait 2 more years, and so it was this constant up and down, up and down, up and down. What is God doing? Well, I don't understand. And no doubt his brothers had to feel the same way because they didn't understand. Because I mean, he's treating, at times he's speaking roughly to them. And then other times he's like, hey, listen, I fear God. When he brings them back after he had them in prison for 3 days, he's like, all right, this is what we're going to do because I fear God. And so they're up and down, up and down, up and down. And so now here we're going to have an up is in verse 25. It says that Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn. And you can imagine, he told the Egyptians, he said, I want them full. Everyone's experienced this. If you buy a bag of potato chips, you get a bag of potato chips, and it looks, so if you go to Costco, you get the jumbo bag, and it looks all full, and as soon as you open it, all the chips fall to the bottom of the bag, and it's about half full. Well, that's not what happened here. He said fill their sacks. And so he fills their sacks, and no doubt there were probably some other people that were there to purchase corn, and they're looking like, we were talking about it this morning. My wife, she's teaching Sunday school this morning, and she was dividing out the stickers, and she said, okay, I have, if there's 25 kids in there, I've got enough for each kid to have 5 stickers apiece. And I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty good. She said, well, actually, I have 127. I said, you better get rid of them, too, because somebody's not going to be happy because someone ended up with 6 stickers, and they only got 5. I said, so you better get rid of them, too. And you watch, there are some people, they just live their whole life. They live their whole life looking for a reason to be upset. And probably some people showed up, and they're like, well, why are those 9 guys' sacks so full? Why are those 9 men's sacks so full and ours are not? Well, their sacks were so full because they were family, but they didn't know it. And it says, and Joseph commanded to fill their sacks and to restore every man's money into his sack. And I talked about this last week. I don't know. Again, if you've ever been somewhere, sometimes you see it where if you're like the shopper of the day or whatever, or the 1,000th customer or whatever, you walk in and you go through the checkout and you go to pay, and they're like, hey, everything's free today. What? Everything's free today for you because you're the 1,000th customer. And you get, sometimes stuff like that, you walk up and you don't realize, like, hey, this is on sale. Grady got the opposite experience yesterday. He thought we went to Home Depot, and he thought he was buying something for $16, and turned out it was $35, and so he wasn't very happy about it. Whenever I'm like, Grady, how much were them things? He said $16, and I looked on the receipt. I said, how about $35? So he wasn't very happy about that. But sometimes you go, and it's supposed to be $35, and you pay, and you're like, well, I thought I was going to have to spend $40 for this thing, and I only spent $20. And you're like, oh, it had a little black line through it, and it was half off. And you're like, wow, that's a blessing. And so what should have been a blessing Like, hey, we come down here to Egypt and we were about to have to spend, a bunch of money. And you think about, you think about the wisdom of Jacob. He told them boys, he said, no, listen, don't y'all put all your money in one basket. Don't y'all put all your money in one basket. If you put all your money in one basket and something happens to that basket, y'all have no money. But if you have your money divided out by 10, if one of them gets stolen, you still got 9/10 of your money. If two of them get stolen, you still got 8/10 of your money. But if you put it all in one basket and that basket gets stolen, you're out of money. So it is interesting to me that Jacob said, hey, look, and because Jacob who he was, Jacob was not a trusting soul. Because Jacob was a person, a person who was a trickster, a schemer, a conniver. Guess what? They're not trusting souls. If someone's a practical joker, they're always thinking like, well, I'm gonna have to figure this out. So someone's gonna try and they're messing with me. And so here is Joseph, and he's doing something good, but they're gonna take it as evil. He's doing something good to them, and they're going to take it as a sign that God is doing something bad to them. When they realize it, they said, what is God doing to us? And so it says restore every man's money into his sack and give them provision for the way. Now again, he's again going above and beyond. I mean, it's not just, hey, here's corn, here's a sack full of corn. And it's not, hey, corn costs this much a bushel. It's, hey, corn costs you nothing. And then not just, hey, the corn costs them nothing, but now, hey, it's a long journey, and I don't want y'all to have to dip into your sack while you're on the way. So we're gonna give you food to eat for your journey. And so again, like I said, they no doubt had to be experiencing some, trying to figure out what's going on here, because in many ways he's jumped on them as he's hiding his identity, and he's accusing them of spies, but yet here he is treating them so well. And so in verse number 26, they load up and leave. In verse number 27, it says, as one of them opened his sack. So it appears that only one of them decided to care for the life of his beast. It would have been interesting to know which one of those it was. Proverbs talks about that right there. But it appears that only one of them opened his sack to feed his donkey. And so, but one of them opens their sack when they're in an inn, and he saw his money. And so his money was right there, and so he opens the sack, opens it up. As soon as he opens it up, boom, he looks down, and there's all the money that he had paid. And so they paid for the corn. They had paid for the corn, but they had no idea that Joseph had commanded, don't keep the money. Just while they're not watching, when you fill the corn up, stick the money right back in there and tie it off so they don't know they got it back. And so he seized his money. But in verse number 28, it says, he said unto his brethren, my money is restored. And again, I mean, you see it all the time. And someone that used to be on the radio, he's not on the radio anymore, he used to call the lottery a poor tax. He called the lottery a poor tax. And if you ever pay attention, most people that play the lottery, they're not wealthy people. Wealthy people don't play the lottery. They don't need to play the lottery. They've already got money. But poor people, I think I was at the Loves. I think I was at the Loves this week. I had to pick Grady up from work, and I was supposed to get a new van, and so I let my van run out of gas, and my new van didn't come in, so I had to put just a few dollars worth in. So I stopped at the Loves right there across from Buc-ee's, and I had to run in real quick. And so as I was walking in, out come this woman, and you could tell she was poor. You could tell she was poor, and she's carrying cigarettes and lottery tickets. And it's like, ma'am, like, number one, I don't understand how anyone can afford to smoke these days. You go in there, it's like $7, $8 a pack now or whatever. Like, how in the world does anyone afford to smoke? But then she had lottery tickets, as soon as I saw her, I'm like, it's just the poor tax. It's the poor tax, and it drives me crazy because we get gas at a place that has ethanol-free gas, and if I have cash on me, I'll just go in and pay for it with cash, but it drives me crazy because people will be in there playing the lottery, and it frustrates me because they'll buy their lottery tickets and they'll stand right at the counter. They'll stand right at the counter and they'll sit there and scratch. And you know what they're going to do if they win? They're going to hand them in and they're going to buy more lottery tickets. They're going to buy more lottery tickets. They're not going to take their money that they won and say, happy day, I won some money. They're going to buy more lottery tickets in hopes that they win more money so they can buy more lottery tickets. And so here are these boys right here. I mean, again, like I said, if you think something's going to cost you something, it costs you nothing, hey, that's a blessing. But that's not how they look at it. He says, my money is restored and lo, it's even in my sack. And their heart failed them. Every one of them. 9 boys. Nine grown men. 9 grown men hear that one man, again, only one, the rest of them aren't going to open it again until verse number 35. They're not even going to. The rest of them aren't even going to look until they get to Canaan. They're not even going to look. And so it says that their heart failed them, and they were afraid. And again, so this is the point of today's Sunday school lesson. It is the Lord, that's who they call Joseph, the Lord was treating them good, but they didn't understand what he was doing. And a lot of times God will be doing things in our life and we don't understand what he's doing. And because of that, we're afraid. And honestly, I don't know. If they knew it was Joseph, just because of their reaction after Jacob died, they probably would have feared. But had they known Joseph, had they, instead of spending Joseph's childhood jealous of Joseph because of how the father treated him, had they really learned who Joseph was and got to know Joseph for who he was and realized that this was Joseph that was doing this to them, they never would have been afraid. And if you ever come to the place in your life where you just trust God, I know Brother Sammy had a statement. My father-in-law used to talk about, take the deed of your life and just sign your name at the bottom and let God fill it in. And I think Brother Sammy had a statement somewhat similar to that. Just take the deed of your life. Take the deed of your life. This is the deed of my life. And just sign your name at the bottom, hand it to God, and say, you do what you want to with it. And if you ever get to that place in your life where no matter what is going on in your life, you can say, God, I don't know. I don't understand. But all I know is that I'm going to trust you. All I know is that what I'm going through right now, I'm going to trust you. And however it turns out, it's going to turn out for my good, even though it looks terrible. Look at what they do. Instead of, it says their heart failed them, saying one another, what is this that God hath done unto us? So now, again, because their conscience, in verse number 21, they said one to another, we are very guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear, therefore is this distress come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, spake I not unto you, saying, do not sin against the child? Because their conscience had never been cleared, anything that happened, God was punishing them. Because their conscience had never been cleared. Their conscience had never been cleared to Joseph because he was gone, and they thought he was dead. Their conscience had never been cleared to Jacob because they could not tell Jacob, actually, it wasn't an evil beast, it was us, we sold him. And so their conscience had never been cleared. And so here, here we are 21 years later. 21 years from the time that they sold Joseph into slavery. 21 years later, and now here's this something that's good happens to them. But they're like, what is God doing to us? Their heart failed them. They said, what is God doing to us? And I'll tell you what they didn't do. They didn't turn around and go back to Egypt. They were in the inn. I don't know if it was the inn right there where they're at in Egypt. You know, that's where they stayed while they were there, or if it was somewhere kind of in between. But they were at an inn. And I'll tell you what they didn't do. They didn't go back and say, hey, Mr. Joseph, we need to talk to you. Or Mr. Zaphnath, you know, well, we need to talk to you. We need to speak to the Lord of the land because we opened this one sack and our money was still here and we wanted to pay for that corn. That's not what they did. They said, if we go back, in their mind, they built a scenario. If I go back, this is what's going to happen. And many times in our own minds, we'll build a scenario, and none of it's true. We'll have this whole big thing built up in our mind. Of this is going to happen, and if this happens, this is going to happen. If this happens, and before long, we're living down by the river. They got the big homeless encampment right now. I actually chuckled the other day. If you ride up, if you pass the Bucky's exit, you get off the Calhoun exit, and look to the right there. They've got a homeless encampment. It is it's like a Motel 6 that they got built on the side of the interstate right there. I mean, it's 100 foot long. It's 100 foot long, and it reminded me of my childhood because we used to build forts all the time when I was a kid. And then I was mowing Dakota's yard the other day, and when I was mowing Dakota's yard, Bobby and Nora Joe got him a beautiful homeless encampment built right behind the fence there in the corner of Dakota's property. And I hadn't got a chance to tell Dakota that maybe Bobby should start building homeless encampments for people because he's done a pretty good job with his shed he's got over there. But anyway, I mean here sometimes you'll have in your mind. We've got Miss Jimmy's a widow, and my mother-in-law's a widow, and Katie's a widow, and Miss Grogan's a widow. I mean, and I'm sure every one of you were convinced that when something happened to your husband, that you were going to be homeless, and you were going to, and yet every one of you are doing great. I mean, sure, could you be better if your husband was still around? Sure. But a lot of times the devil or you yourself will convince you, you'll create this huge scenario. You'll create this scenario, and instead of just saying, God, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to trust you. And if you ever come out, these boys eventually are going to come out and realize who it was and be like, well, we were safe all along. We were safe all along, but they built this huge scenario in their mind, and they said, what is this that God had done in us? And they came in verse 29, they came unto Jacob their father unto the land of Canaan, and told him all that befell them, saying, the man who is the Lord of the land. Can you imagine the difference? Can you imagine the difference in reaction it would have been had they known who it was and had they told this story and just changed the terminology from the man who is the Lord of the land to Joseph? Imagine how different the story would be if they just said, hey, Dad, you're not going to believe it. But Joseph is down there in Egypt, and Joseph is over Egypt, and Joseph is the Lord of the land. And he treated us this way because he wants Benjamin to come down, and after Benjamin comes down, he wants you to come down. But again, because they didn't know who he was, it changes the story. And if you're always trying to figure things out and not just trusting God, it changes the story. If you're always like, well, so-and-so's doing me wrong, and they might be doing you wrong. But if you just say, so-and-so's doing me wrong, but God's doing something. And I need to just let God do what he wants to do, and then I'll get through this. My father-in-law used to talk about test. He used to talk about test. He'd drop a tool. He'd drop a tool and it would roll down and roll underneath the car, and he'd be like, that is exactly where I wanted. Brother Hollis probably heard him say that. Brother Parks, you probably heard him say it. That is exactly where I wanted that tool to go. That is exactly where I wanted that tool to go. And then he'd be like, am I ever going to learn? Now I'm going to have to take that test again. Now I'm going to have to drop another tool, and it's going to have to roll underneath the car, and I'm just going to have to say, thank you, Lord. And so many times we take tests in our Christian life over and over and over. We get tried over and over and over. Why? Because we keep failing the test. And the way to pass the test is say, God, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you're doing it. I don't understand how this is going to change. They were afraid. And yet everything that was going on was working out for their good. But they just couldn't see it. Because they didn't know who the person was that was pulling all the strings. And we know who the person is that's pulling all the strings in our life. But if you get your eyes off of him and get your eyes on the present situation, you'll be fearful. You'll be frustrated. You'll be telling a story, and instead of saying, and you never mention God, you'll only mention the person that's doing you wrong. You only mention this guy. He does this, and he does this, and he drives me crazy. And the question is, well, why is God allowing that to happen? What is God doing? And figure out what God's doing, pass that test, and guess what? That guy will just be a guy in your memory. It's just a guy in your memory. He said, this man who is the Lord of the land spake roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. And we said unto him, we are true men. Now, you can imagine as Joseph was standing there and they say, we are true men. I'm sure he multiple times he had to walk away and weep, but I wonder if he had a smirk on his face whenever they said, we are true men. We're true men. And so we are no spies. We be 12 brethren, sons of our father. One is not. And here they are, and they're talking to the person who they thought is not. They said, one is not. And they're talking to the one who was, but they thought was not. One is not, and the youngest is to stay with our father in the land of Canaan, and the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, hereby shall I know that you're true men. Leave one of your brethren here with me, and take food for the famine of your household, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother unto me, then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that ye are true men. So I'll deliver you your brother, and ye shall traffic in the land. So again, he explains to Jacob, like, this is the deal. And they're going to explain it to him again. But if we don't bring Benjamin back, we cannot purchase more corn. If we don't bring Benjamin back, we are going to starve. And so in verse number 35, it says again, it came to pass as they emptied their sacks, that behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. So here we have it again. One of them opened their sack while they were in Egypt. One of them opened it. They looked, saw the money. Their heart failed them. And so they took off. It doesn't look like they fed their animals. They said, we're getting out of here, and we're going to Canaan as fast as we can, or we're all going to end up down there in the prison with Simeon. And so now here they are. Now they're all finally opening their sack. And when they open their sack, every one of them, the other 8, opened their sack. And all 8 of them looked down, and every one of them, there's their money. And you know, I mean, to me it would have been funny, but I mean, it would have been funny. Just here's a little card, here's a little note from the Lord of the land with individual names. Reuben, here's yours. Levi, here's yours. Judah, Dan, Naphtali, every one of them. Here's a little note saying, "Here's your money back, boys." But that's not what happened. So they see the money, and now not only are the boys afraid, but now their father's afraid. What did their father have to fear? Well, probably one of the greatest days in his life was coming up. Is coming up. The day that he finds out that Joseph, who he thought was dead, is still alive. And those days leading up to that, he spent in fear. He spent afraid. You're going to see that they had to convince him, and he procrastinated and procrastinated and procrastinated, and Judah finally gets on to him and says, "Hey, look, like, had you not waited so long, we could have already been back the second time. We haven't even went to go get more corn, but because you've waited so long." And what did he wait so long for? Because he feared. He feared what was going to happen to Benjamin. He feared what was going to happen to Benjamin. And because of fear, he did not move. And one of the greatest things that was going to happen in his life was standing there waiting for him. But he had to overcome his fear and just say, I don't know what the Lord of the land's going to do, but I'm just going to have to let him do it. And sometimes the greatest day in your life will be the day that you finally learn to surrender to God. The day that you learn to surrender to God and say, "God, here's the deed. I'm taking a pen. I'm writing my name on it. I don't know how you're going to fill the paper in. Just fill it in." And so here's Jacob. And Jacob, their father, said unto them, "Me have ye bereaved of my children." Now, he's not talking to God. He's talking to his boys. And I don't know. He does. Maybe he did understand. Again, he's a trickster. So maybe he did understand. Them boys didn't quite tell the truth whenever they came back. Whenever they said Joseph was torn by an evil beast. He said, "Me have ye bereaved of my children? Joseph is not." He assumed Joseph was dead, but he blamed it on those boys. Again, those boys acted like they just found the coat of many colors. They're like wondering, "Oh, would you look at that? There's the coat. Wonder whose coat that is." Take it to the father. "Do you recognize this coat? Is this your son's coat? He must have got torn by an evil beast." But so here's Jacob. He said, "Me have you bereaved of my children? Joseph is not, and Simeon is not." He basically tells them Simeon's dead also. Again, back to, he's created a scenario in his mind that's not true. "Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me." Nothing was against him. All those things were working out for his good, but he just couldn't see it. All those things. Well, we've got people here young enough to be dating age, and sometimes you date someone and it doesn't work out, and you're like, "This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me." And maybe it wasn't God's will. And then you find God's will, and then you can look back and say, "I tell you what, it was awful at the time, but now I see. Now I see." and so you know, and many times in our life, if I had Miss Jimmy testify or Brother Hollis testify, I'd be like, "Hey, tell me about some times in your life where you just couldn't see it while you're going through it." But then you turn around and look back, and you're like, I see it plainly now. I see it plainly now. I couldn't see it then, and I was so fearful, and I created this giant scenario of all these terrible things that were going to happen, and then in the end, quoted my father-in-law a lot this morning, but he used to talk. He told a story about Leslie at school, and he told her. He said most of life's dragons are paper dragons, and the ones that aren't, God is in control, and He's only going to let that dragon take what He's going to allow. And so here is Jacob, and he's like, all these things are against me. All these things are against me. And they weren't against him at all. They weren't against him at all. They were for him. God was working this out, and God was going to work out the greatest day in an old man's life was coming up, but he couldn't see it. Now, if you look in verse number 37, we're going to change slightly here. But in verse number 37, now apparently they're starting to run low on corn. I mean, obviously, as you read the Bible, sometimes you're reading verse, the one verse and go to the next verse, and you read it with the assumption that it's immediately happening, but it's not always immediately happening. In verse number 37, it says, and Reuben spake unto his father, saying, slay my 2 sons if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. Now here's Reuben, and I almost feel bad for Reuben. I almost feel bad for Reuben, because what happened with Reuben was he did something as a younger man that he shouldn't have done. And he lived the rest of his life trying to make up for it. And in Jacob's mind, he never made up for it. And again, I understand what he did, and he did it to Jacob. I'm not making little of what he did, but Reuben spent the rest of his life trying to make up for that in Jacob's eyes, and he never got there. And so here's Reuben, and Reuben speaks up. He's the oldest. In chapter 49, I know I've read it before. He says in verse number 3, Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, and the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. So someone come in, they'd come in like Samuel did whenever God told him to go down to Jesse's house to anoint a new king. He's going to come in, and Jesse's going to bring in the firstborn and be like, oh, look at this guy right here. This is my firstborn. I'm so proud of him. He's so strong. He's so this. He's so that. And Samuel's like, not him. But here's Jacob, and he said, look, you have every attribute. You have every attribute. But because you were weak in your mind and you gave in to sin, because you did that, because you went to your father's bed, because of that, he said, you're unstable as water. And you cannot be trusted. So if you remember and he brought it up in chapter 42, he said, he told him, he said, whenever they're talking about how much, how they were guilty, and Reuben said unto them, spake I not unto you, saying, do not sin against the child? He lost the respect of his brothers early on too, and they didn't listen to him. In most situations, if the older brother's an older brother, and the older brother says this is how we're doing it, guess what? That's how it was going to get done. That was how it was going to get done. I mentioned it, there was going to be brother justice that was going to be meted out. Brother justice was going to show up, and it was going to be meted out. When brother justice meted out the justice, guess what? Then they were going to do what the older brother said. But Reuben didn't have that relationship with them boys. He didn't have that relationship with them boys. And so when he said, hey, let's not do this to the child, it was Judah, which you're going to see the same situation here. It was Judah that had to step in. It was Judah that had to step in and say, hey, let's not kill him, let's sell him. And so here in the end of this chapter, here is Reuben. And again, think about what he said. He said, look, you give him to me, and I'll take Benjamin down there, and we'll come back with the corn, and he'll be fine. And if he's not fine, you can slay my 2 sons. And Jacob said, look at what he says in verse 3. And he said, my son shall not go down with you. He said, not you, Reuben, because I don't trust you. Not you, Reuben, because you're unstable as water. You're not trustworthy. I mean, again, we're going to be 17 years later in chapter number 49, and 17 years later, Jacob still feels the same way. Reuben never made it up. He never made it up. And sometimes, again, I mean, God will forgive you. God will forgive you. He'll forgive you of your sin. But there's sometimes you do things, and we as humans, we're not God. And we don't know how to get over it. We do our best. But it'll always be there in our mind. And it was always in Jacob's mind. He went up. He defiled. He went up. He defiled. And so here's Reuben, and he's like, hey, Dad, I'll do it. I'll take the boy. I'll take the lad down. And Jacob looked at him and said, not you. Not you. And he has to wait until Judah comes, and Judah says, it'll be on me. It'll be on me. Before Jacob is able to say, you know, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. Before Jacob's able to say that, Judah has to come and say, hey, I'll take full responsibility for Benjamin. And Jacob looked at Judah and said, I trust you. Can you imagine how Reuben had to feel? He offered the life of his two sons to say, look, Dad, you can trust me this time. And Jacob said, no, I cannot. No, I'm so serious you can kill my two sons. And again, there are times where you can do something, and I don't care what you offer. People aren't going to get over it. They don't get over it. And again, I understand as Christians, we forgive, but we're not God. We can't put things as far as the east is from the west. We can't bury things in the depths of the deepest sea. And so you need to constantly be on guard, because it was just one day, and it was one sin, but that sin followed him the rest of his life. And you say, well, it's just a little thing. No, it wasn't a little thing. It wasn't a little thing to Jacob. It wasn't a little thing. It wasn't a little thing to Jacob. And so here's Reuben. He said, I'll go. He said, and my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead. Talking about Joseph again, which was not true. And he is left alone. Now it's funny how that Jacob, basically it almost appears like Jacob looked at him like he had four families, you know. I mean, because here he said, look, Benjamin. I mean, the boys describe themselves as we be 12 brethren, but Jacob describes Benjamin as being left alone, because Jacob and Benjamin were Rachel's children. And so here's, again, Jacob almost looked at like he had four families. He had Leah's kids and the other two's and Rachel's kids. And so here he said, he's left alone. If mischief befall him by the way into which ye go down, then ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. And again, here we are again, where Jacob has created a scenario. He's created this scenario that something was going to happen to Benjamin. Something's going to happen to Benjamin. I can't let Benjamin go because something's going to happen to Benjamin. And he is right. Something is going to happen to Benjamin. But it's not bad. It's good. But because he didn't know who the Lord of the land was, he had totally different feeling for it. And if you don't properly understand that it's God pulling all the strings in your life, even in Job's life, it was God that told the devil, yes, you can do this. Even all the way to Job's life, as bad as those things were, it was God that said, yes, you can do this, but you can only go this far. And the devil come back and said, can I have permission to do this? Yes, you can do this, but you can only go this far. Even in Job's life. And Job couldn't see it, and Job couldn't understand it. And the only thing Job could do was endure it. And then Job's 3 friends come and they accuse him of everything they accuse. And sometimes your friends will come and your friends will be like, oh, this is awful, you shouldn't be going through this. But you can look at them and say, hey, I don't understand it. But God, the Lord of the land, the Lord of all the earth, is doing something. And I'm just going to let him do it. Thank you.